Right.
I really
well did you work closely with the Romney and the Milliken and the Griffin campaigns, for that matter? Bob Griffin that year was running against Soapy Williams for the U.S. Senate. In terms of devising the strategy for the party, you may remember they ran a Romney Action Team campaign.
Right.
You had bumper stickers with Romney, Griffin, and Romney,
literature.
Milliken, and everything was tied in together. All the top to bottom, governor, right on down to, you know, county board of supervisors. Right. Almost. Right. Was that something that you felt that you kind of honed to perfection in that particular year? Or was that something that you basically done as far as you could do it, or as well as you could do it all the way along during the 50s and 60s when you'd work for the party in other capacities?
Well, I think for one thing, people had been so turned off by the bitterness that was engendered during the 1964 campaign that people were delighted to see everybody pulling together, the whole team working together. And that was, I think, due to the strength of those three men and the fact that they were so honorable. And so that, I think, was good. But we just had a smooth running organization.
What was your biggest disappointment, if you had to put your finger on one, let's say during your tenure, those 4 years, 1965 to 69, as the chairman of the party? Did you have a big disappointment? Was there something that you didn't accomplish that you wanted to accomplish, either organizationally or in terms of somebody getting elected or not elected?
Well, you know, one of the strongest programs that I had was called Action Now. And I was trying to sell Republican workers on the idea that their volunteerism was tied in with being a Republican, and that all that should work together. And so we devised volunteer programs that were run by the Republican Party. And I had a good troop of women working on that, and quite a few men. And I was so proud of that because it brought, we got acres of publicity, like in the riot.
Right, in the 1967 Detroit riot, I remember that.
We sent the food down to, we never got any credit for it, but we sent the food by the truckload down to Detroit because our people were organized and wanted to help. And one little lady came into the armory in Lansing and brought a plate of brownies to go down. I think the sailors who were packing the boxes took them. But we did lots of things like that in that era that would not have showed up, that didn't show up at the time, and really were building for the future. And I guess my biggest disappointment in political life was that there were very few people could see the future of that. I mean,
they didn't keep it going after you left. It kind of died on the vine.
Romney tried to do something in Washington, but
at that
the average male chairman thought, you know, I worked with some fine state chairmen. Bob Ray became governor of Iowa, you know.
Right.
But and they a lot of them did use the program a little, but
you think it was peculiarly a woman's type of program? I mean, kind of a hands-on, a people-oriented, person-to-person cooperative program that maybe only a woman chairperson could have really foreseen and really worked on and organized to the extent that it could be done well. Men weren't so likely to be that interested.
Well, the men here in Michigan, the young Republican men, were wonderfully supported. They became, they taught the young students in the ghettos and that kind of thing. But I presume it was more women probably were involved than men. But some of the men took to the program very well, and it gave us something to do in an off-election year bill. Parties, organizations didn't have anything to do in an off-election year except to have a speaker come. These people were working. We had over 550 volunteer programs throughout the state.
Let me ask you this, particularly when you started Action Now and what you did with it. What was your view of the Democratic Party, your adversaries, all during this period from 57 right up until 1970, 72? Did you see the Michigan Democratic Party is evolving or changing during that time? Were they pretty much the same? How did you look upon the Democrats?
Well, when I first started, they were totally oriented to labor. Labor ran the party and called the shots and raised the money and all that. And in those days, they could turn out an assembly line, and they had cope, and they educated their people. And I was somewhat envious of their educational programs because they were excellent. But as time passed, those people moved away from the Democratic Party, and labor just didn't have the strength it had. But that seemed to be the
So you felt that there was a weakening of labor's influence during the time you actually worked for the Republican Party. That's interesting because, you know, a lot of people contend today that organized labor is still too powerful in the Democratic Party.
All they have to take a look at is what they're able to do. They haven't won any elections around Michigan for a while, and they can't turn out the vote like they did.
That's true.
And and it may just be my opinion, but my opinion is that they don't have, I don't think they have the people, and I don't think they have the strength, but I think they still have a lot of power.
So in other words, they may be powerful enough to get somebody nominated in a primary, but after that they have a heck of a tough time in a general election trying to win Republicans and independents compared to what they were able to do back in the 50s and 60s.
We didn't find during my tenure that there was much Democratic organization. Right here in Eaton County there wasn't, and yet there were a lot of Democrats, but they never seemed to bring them together, and they just sort of depended on the labor unions to turn out the vote.
How did you get along with legislative leaders when you were state chairman? I mean, in other words, people like Emil Lockwood, who was the Senate Republican Majority Leader, Bob Waldron, who was Speaker of the House.
We tried to build a bridge between the party and the legislature, which I don't think other people had done. We'd have them to breakfast meetings, and we put on programs where if someone wasn't sure of themselves and their speaking ability, we'd try to teach them how to give a good speech, you know. Because
you mean you tried to actually help legislators make better speeches, huh?
And Harold McClure was one of our finance men, and he wanted it fixed so that the legislator didn't have to worry about collecting his own money. He'd get it and get it from the party. And so they tried that. That didn't work forever, I don't think. That was short-lived. But we did actually try to build a bridge with them. And at that time, we got along very nicely.
Now, wasn't Emil Lockwood the chairman of the Richard Nixon campaign for president in '68 in Michigan?
Yes,
and you were the state chairman. So, what, you had to work pretty closely together then, right?
Yes, and in fact, we went to California to the first meeting that John Mitchell had.
Yeah.
He just was so happy to have a woman come to that meeting.
Oh, he was?
Oh,
not two, huh?
He was the biggest chauvinist I've ever encountered.
Is that right?
Number
well,
one.
No wonder Martha had problems, huh?
Yeah,
you were pretty sympathetic with her, I imagine, later on when she started, you know, unburdening herself.
He really did. He just did not believe women had any part. But I knew my state and I knew my people, and that's one thing. And that was why I had such a good working relationship with other state chairmen. First meeting I went to, Ray Bliss was the national chairman, and see, he would never let a woman in the meeting. If a woman came with a proxy from a state chairman,
Ray Bliss wouldn't?
He wouldn't let him have the proxy. But he couldn't turn me down because I wouldn't change it. So I got in there, and every time he would swear, he'd say, "Excuse me." And finally, I said, "Ray, let's, you know, knock it off. My husband's in the Army. I know probably more words than you know." And he became at ease, and we had a good, wonderful working relationship. I respected and admired him. And he, of course, was the builder of big city. He felt we shouldn't wipe big cities off, and I felt that way too. So then we got along just fine from then on.
You had to break down the resistance a little bit at the outset.
Oh, you had to do that every place. The first finance meeting I went to in Max Fisher's office, he told me they were going down to some private men's club, and I could go down and have lunch in the basement with his secretary.
Max Fisher was your main finance chairman.
Yeah, I was the one that was going to spend the money and direct the organization, and so it wasn't easy being a woman in politics in those days. So there weren't very many that.
But I got a feeling it didn't deter you too much, right?
No, you just sort of took it. I mean, you knew if you were going to do it, you had to accept all that. And you know, Romney, Milliken, and Griffin, they were.